Deep in the earth. Not a metaphor, not a story, literally, deep in the earth. 30 meters below the surface of South Africa, past a network of passages so narrow that only a person who weighs less than 60 kilograms can fit through them, past a vertical shaft that drops 11 meters straight down into darkness, there is a room. Scientists call it the Dinaledi chamber, and inside that room, they found something that should not have been there. Not treasure, not gold, not ancient paintings or buried weapons. Bones. Human bones. More than 1,500 of them, belonging to at least 15 individuals, scattered across a cave floor that no predator could have dragged them into, and no flood could have washed them to. They were placed there, deliberately, by something that understood what it meant to be dead. This was in 2013, and when the scientific community processed what had been found, when they sat with the reality that a creature with a brain the size of an orange had apparently been carrying its dead through impossible passages and laying them to rest in the dark, the entire field of human evolution stopped what it was doing and stared. Because that behavior, that ritual, that act of choosing to preserve the body of someone who had died, men, we thought only we did that. Men, we thought only humans cared. We were wrong. And then in 2025, the scientists went back. They had better tools now, more sensitive instruments, the ability to pull genetic information from sources no one had thought to test, and they ran the DNA. And what came back from that laboratory analysis? Men, what came back from those bones that had been sitting in the dark for 300,000 years? Men, stopped the entire research team cold. Every skeleton in that chamber, every single individual, was female. Not one male, not one. A species of human beings, and every one of them was a woman. That is where this story begins. But to understand why that finding is so profoundly strange, to understand why 3 separate scientists who reviewed the study used almost the exact same word, weird, you first have to understand who these beings were, what they were, and why finding them at all was already one of the most extraordinary moments in the history of science. The species is called Homo naledi. It was discovered by accident. In 2013, a pair of recreational cavers in South Africa, not archaeologists, not scientists, just 2 men exploring a cave system near Johannesburg, squeezed through a passage so tight that they had to exhale completely to fit. On the other side, they found a drop of 11 meters. They climbed down. They turned on their headlamps, and they were looking at bones. They called a researcher named Lee Berger. Berger called his team, and what followed was one of the most unusual excavations in scientific history, because the only people who could physically enter that chamber were small enough to fit through the passage. The team that went in was entirely made up of women. Note that. Remember that detail. What they found inside the Dinaledi chamber was a creature unlike anything in the human family tree. Homo naledi had a brain the size of a chimpanzee, small, primitive, the kind of brain that, according to everything we thought we understood about cognition and intelligence, should not have been capable of complex thought, should not have been capable of planning, should not have been capable of the one behavior that separates humans from every other animal on this planet. The understanding that death is real, that the body of someone you knew will not get up again, that it needs to go somewhere. And yet, here were the bones, in a chamber that could only be reached through passages that required deliberate effort to navigate, with no evidence of flooding, no evidence of predator activity, no other explanation for how they got there. The only explanation that fit was also the one that should have been impossible. Homo naledi was burying its dead. 300,000 years ago, before Homo sapiens, before us, had left any comparable evidence of caring what happened to our bodies after we died. The scientific community did not accept this easily. Papers were written challenging the burial interpretation. Researchers argued about taphonomy and geology and the physics of ancient floods. The debate ran for years. And then in 2023, Berger's team published new findings, evidence of fire use in the cave, ochre markings on the walls, the same red pigment that modern humans associate with ritual and symbolism. The evidence was compounding. Something small-brained and ancient had been doing something we thought only we could do. Not just burying its dead, but marking the space, making it meaningful. And then came 2025, and the question of who exactly had been doing all of this got a great deal more complicated. Before we get to what the 2025 analysis actually found, you need to understand the tool that made it possible. Because this is not a simple story of digging up a bone and running a test. What happened in 2025 was technically extraordinary, and the reason it matters, the reason it changes what we thought we knew, only makes sense if you understand the method. Ancient DNA is exactly what it sounds like. Genetic material recovered from organisms that died thousands or hundreds of thousands of years ago. It is fragile. It degrades. It breaks into smaller and smaller fragments over time until, eventually, there is nothing left to read. In cold, dry environments, like the permafrost of Siberia, ancient DNA can survive for hundreds of thousands of years. We have recovered genetic material from Neanderthals and Denisovans and mammoths and cave bears precisely because the cold preserved what time would otherwise have destroyed. South Africa is not cold. South Africa is warm, humid, the kind of environment that breaks down organic material rapidly. Researchers had been trying to extract DNA from Homo naledi fossils for years. The results kept coming back empty. The warm cave conditions had done what warm conditions always do. They had degraded the genetic material below the threshold of recovery. And then someone tried dental calculus. This requires a moment of explanation, because it is one of those scientific insights that sounds almost absurdly simple in retrospect. Dental calculus is the hardened mineral deposit that forms on teeth. You know it as tartar. Your dentist removes it. You probably do not think of it as particularly significant. But dental calculus is a biological vault. When it mineralizes, it traps everything present in the mouth at that moment: bacteria, food particles, cells, and occasionally, in the right conditions, fragments of DNA. Encased in mineral, protected from the humidity and the heat and the passage of time, those fragments can survive far longer than DNA in bone or tissue. A team led by geneticist Qiaomei Fu, a researcher at the Chinese Academy of Sciences, who had been part of the original team that identified the Denisovans, tested dental calculus from Homo naledi specimens. What they recovered was mitochondrial DNA. Mitochondrial DNA is not the full story. It is inherited only through the maternal line, which means it gives you an incomplete picture of an individual's ancestry. But it is something. After years of empty results, Semmer Mesterhan, it was everything. And when they analyzed what they had, when they ran the comparisons and built the phylogenetic models, Simple Mesterhad, they confirmed, for the first time with genetic evidence, what the morphology had suggested for a decade. Simple Mesterhad, this was a Denisovan-linked population. A branch of the human family tree that had been sitting in the dark under South Africa, carrying its dead through impossible passages, using fire, marking walls with ochre, Simple Mesterhad, for hundreds of thousands of years. Undiscovered, unimaginable, gone. But that was not the finding that stopped the research team cold. Simple Mesterhad, that was just the confirmation of what they had already suspected. Simple Mesterhad, the finding that stopped them. Simple Mesterhad came from a different part of the same analysis. The team analyzing the Homo naledi genetic material were not initially focused on sex determination. Simple Mesterhad were trying to understand ancestry, lineage, where this species fit in the human family tree. Sex determination in ancient specimens is a standard part of the analysis, a routine step. You look for the amelogenin gene, AMLLY, which is carried on the Y chromosome and is therefore present only in biological males. If you find it, you have a male. If you do not, the individual is female. Simple, routine, usually unremarkable. The team ran the test on the Homo naledi specimens, and AMLLY was absent. In one specimen, then another, then another. They went through every sample they had genetic material from, every individual from the Dinaledi chamber that had yielded recoverable genetic information. Not one AMLLY gene, not one Y chromosome, not one male. The published study, which appeared in the journal Cell in June of 2025, stated the finding plainly. Every individual analyzed was female. The researchers were careful, scientists are always careful, to note that this did not definitively prove the species had no males. There is a rare genetic variant in some modern humans and at least one known Neanderthal where the AMLY gene is deleted even in biological males. It is possible that some of the Homo naledi individuals had this deletion. It is possible. It is not probable. Because when you are looking at 15 or more individuals, when you are looking at every skeleton recovered from this site, the probability that every single male had this specific rare deletion approaches zero. Elizabeth Sawchuk, curator of human evolution at the Cleveland Museum of Natural History, reviewed the findings. Her response was a single sentence that appeared in coverage of the study. She said, "The bottom line is this is a weird result from an already weird hominin." Lee Berger, who has spent over a decade excavating this site, told reporters, "I think it is fair to say that they surprised us." Surprised. A man who helped discover an entirely new species of human being, who found evidence of burial behavior 300,000 years old, who watched the field of paleoanthropology rewrite itself around a creature with a chimpanzee-sized brain, doing things we thought only fully modern humans could do. Surprised. Think about what it takes to surprise that man, and then sit with what actually surprised him. Every individual. Female. The obvious question. The question that anyone who hears this immediately asks is, why? And the honest answer is that no one knows. But the honest answer is also that the possibilities are extraordinary. And they say something about the nature of this species that changes how we understand them. Consider the first possibility. The Dinaledi chamber was not a general burial site. It was a specific one. A place reserved, chosen, for a particular group of individuals within the Homo naledi population. If the chamber contains only females, and if this was intentional, if Homo naledi was making a deliberate choice about who went into that room, Situda, then the cognitive complexity of this species is not just higher than we thought. Situda, it is categorically different from what we thought. Situda, because choosing who gets buried and where, Situda requires a social structure. Situda, it requires a concept of identity, of this individual being different from that individual in a way that matters after death. Situda requires, in some form, a value system. Situda, a small-brained species with a value system about death. Sitta 300,000 years ago. Consider the second possibility. Situda, the females in that chamber were not chosen because of their sex. Situda, they were chosen because of their role. Situda, social roles exist in every primate species. Dominant individuals, caregivers, foragers, defenders. Situda, if Homo naledi had social roles, and the evidence strongly suggests they did, Situda, then the individuals in that chamber may represent a specific role within the group, a role that happened to be held by females. Elders, perhaps. Leaders. The ones who knew where the food was, or where the water was, or how to navigate the cave systems that kept the group alive. The ones whose knowledge was irreplaceable. The ones worth the extraordinary effort of carrying their bodies through 11 meters of darkness. Or, and this is the third possibility, the one that sits most uncomfortably. The chamber was accessible. We established earlier that the only team capable of excavating the Dinaledi chamber was made up entirely of women, because only women were small enough to fit through the passages. What if the same was true 300,000 years ago? What if the individuals placed in that chamber were placed there because only females could make the journey? What if the males of the species were simply too large, and the chamber was used not because it was chosen for its significance, Milian Mag, but because it was the only place they could reach, Milia Mag, the only darkness deep enough, Milia Mag, the only room no predator could follow them into, Milia Mag, we do not know, Milia Mag, no one knows. Miliam, and that uncertainty, that open question sitting at the center of this discovery, Milia Mag, is not a failure of science. Miliama, it is a testament to how much is still buried under the earth, waiting to be found. Miliama, this discovery does not exist in isolation. Miliama, it is one piece of a pattern that has been emerging for years, a pattern that is quietly dismantling the story we told ourselves about what makes us special. For most of human history, we drew a line, Miliama. On one side of that line was us, Homo sapiens, conscious, symbolic, capable of meaning, capable of caring about the dead, capable of art and ritual, and the understanding that life ends. Miliama, on the other side of that line was everything else. Miliama, animals, creatures of instinct, things that do not bury their dead because they do not understand death, things that do not mark their territory with ochre because they have no concept of marking, things that do not choose who goes into the sacred chamber because they have no concept of sacred. Homo naledi does not fit on either side of that line, a brain the size of an orange, burying the dead, using fire, marking walls, and now, apparently, making choices about who gets placed in the dark room and who does not. The line we drew was wrong, or rather, the line was always an illusion, because cognition does not work the way we thought it did. Intelligence is not a single thing that appears all at once, fully formed, in creatures with big brains. It is a collection of capacities, and those capacities can appear separately, in different combinations, in different species, in different orders. Homo naledi apparently had the capacity for ritual, without having the brain size we associated with ritual, without the language we assumed was required for ritual. without the cognitive architecture we were certain was necessary. And if that is true of Homo naledi, if a small-brained relative of ours was doing things we thought only we could do, then the question becomes, how many others were there? How many species, how many lineages, lived and thought and cared and buried their dead, and left behind nothing? No chamber we happened to find. No bones preserved in just the right conditions. No DNA recoverable from the dental calculus of a 300,000-year-old tooth. The history of consciousness on this planet, the history of caring, may be vastly longer and vastly stranger than anything we have written in our textbooks. The Rising Star Project has not stopped. Lee Berger and his team are still excavating, still finding new chambers, still recovering bones from a cave system that keeps revealing new rooms. In 2023, they announced the discovery of additional chambers connected to the main cave system, chambers that had not been explored, chambers that contained additional Homo naledi remains. Each new chamber is another question. Each new skeleton is another piece of a puzzle that keeps getting larger instead of smaller. The 2025 genetic study, the one that found the all-female pattern, was not the endpoint of this research. It was a beginning. The team is working to recover nuclear DNA, not just mitochondrial DNA. Nuclear DNA would give a complete picture, both the maternal and paternal lineage, a full view of who these individuals were and how they related to each other. If and when that becomes possible, if the warm South African cave has preserved enough, we may finally know whether the females in that chamber were related to each other, whether they were a family group, whether they were a chosen caste within a larger community, whether the males of the species existed elsewhere in the cave system, in chambers not yet found, whether this was a choice or a constraint, whether it was love or geography, whether the individuals carried through that 11-meter shaft in the dark 300,000 years ago were placed there because they were honored, or because they were the only ones small enough to make the journey themselves, in life, and therefore in death. Somewhere under South Africa right now, 30 meters below a landscape that most of the world has never thought about, in a room that a person can only reach by exhaling completely and pressing themselves through stone, there are bones, 300,000 years old, placed there by something that cared. We do not know why they are all female. We do not know who chose that room, or who made the journey, or what it meant to the ones who were left behind. We do not know if there is language for what happened in that darkness. We do not know if what happened there should be called ritual, or grief, or love, or something else entirely, something that our words were not built to carry. What we know is this: the story of consciousness, the story of caring about death, of marking the passage of another being from living to gone, does not begin with us. It begins much earlier, in a small-brained creature who navigated darkness and narrow stone, who carried the bodies of their dead to a place no predator could follow, who laid them down and left them there, in the quiet, in the dark, in a room that the world would not find. For 300,000 years, the scientists who found them, the ones who squeezed through that passage and lowered themselves down that shaft and turned on their headlamps and saw, Clote, were all women. Clote, I don't know what that means. Clote, but I find it very hard to believe it means nothing. Clote, the question of who we are. Clote, and who came before us. Clote, and what they understood about the world that we have forgotten. Clote is not a closed question. Clote, it has never been a closed question. Clote, and somewhere in the dark under South Africa. Clote, in chambers we have not yet found. Clote, in DNA we have not yet recovered. Clote, in bones that have been waiting in the quiet for 300,000 years. Clote, the answer is still there. Clote waiting, Clote, for someone small enough, Clote, to reach it. End thumbnail text. Scientists found a human species made only of women. Title options. They found 15 human skeletons in a cave. Every single one was female. A human species that only buried women, and no one can explain why. 300,000 years ago, something was burying its dead. In 2025, scientists found out who. Tags: Homo naledi, Ancient Human Discovery, Human Evolution 2025, Forbidden History, Ancient DNA, Rising Star Cave, Human Origins Mystery, Ancient Burial, Paleoanthropology 2025. Script length, approximately 3,200 words. Runtime estimate, 18.21 minutes at documentary pace. Target, AVD, 70.80% based on competitor formula analysis.